Welcome to the SumerSports show. Lindsay, Rhodes, and Sam Bruchhaus with you, along with Matthew Stopsky, who will be popping in periodically. We're talking about the schedule release, which is going to happen officially on Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern. There have been like a slow trickle of games and dates that are already out. Sam, I will say, I'm really interested in this conversation because we're going to talk about the things that matter with regards to the schedule release, rest, and when the bye happens, and what all of the data says about how important those things actually are. But also, just in terms of tentpole events that the NFL has carved out on its calendar, this is my least favorite. I don't care about schedule release. Do you care? Are you going to be tuned in at 8 o'clock with bated breath, waiting to see if your team is playing in the snow in October or what?
Being a fan of a dome team kind of puts me in the same position of we're probably going to be playing in a dome when we're going to Atlanta, when we're in New Orleans, and I'm talking about the New Orleans Saints. And so, from a data perspective, from a fan perspective, if you're not traveling, particularly some of these international games, which I know we'll get to, because that's really what's fascinating. Yeah, that's really what's fascinating about this. It's okay, I'll figure it out when we get closer to the season. But from the player perspective, this does have pretty huge implications, particularly if you're a professional player, when you get to see your kids for 4 to 5 days, unembroidered. And then for me, when I was in college, it was always when can I get right? When do I get a break? Because despite, some of the data that we'll go over, it does feel massive in a bye week. You do feel a weight come off your shoulders, at least because that high level of competition, that adrenaline shooting through your veins isn't going to be there for a little week. So I think this is a real kind of mixed bag of different views from people around the league in terms of the way that they're approaching it, the element or the impact they think it's going to have.
Yeah.
And then finally, for the broadcasters, this means everything. So I think that's interesting as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously fans are looking for travel patterns, right? Their teams and fans are looking for weather, right? When am I going to Buffalo? When am I going to Miami? How hot, how cold? What, when did I get those weeks? When the bye is, I think that's obviously massive, and that's probably the first thing that players are looking for. And then maybe when the short weeks, long weeks, when those types of patterns are. That might be more teams that are looking for that type of thing, rest disparity, which is a big conversation around the schedule release. Because we already know all of the teams that who's playing who. So we've got a strength of schedule number. We kind of know what it looks like. Now we just find out the pattern in which they will be playing them, the order, I suppose, not pattern, and trying to attach some meaning to that. There are some themes that have emerged around this time that do have to do with rest. And so I was curious about what you have found with regards to rest disparity advantage. How advantageous is it to have more time to prepare versus not?
Yeah, so the league has put out research on this and has approached this in their discussions with the collective bargaining agreement. The top of the line is there does not seem to be a massive correlation between success in games and rest differential. Now, the reasons why that may be are kind of long, and frankly, it's changed, Lindsay, since the 2011 CBA, which changed a ton of stuff, whether that's rookie wage scale. There was a lockout prior to that. So it really changed kind of the face of the NFL. This was one of those items that came with those changes, in that there is no longer really a massive rest differential improvement. And not only that, but even the books are starting to catch up to it and starting to kind of down weight the way that they price that in to their lines. And so despite what you may see out there.
Why is there no more? Why did the CBA in 2011 impact that?
Yeah. So prior to 2011, there was actually a pretty substantial rest differential impact. And the sheer number of it, what the league has put out, the league analyzed this, put the open source data out. Mike Lopez and Tom Bliss, who are two of my colleagues, I've met them in New York. They're really good guys and they do really great work. Found that it was about a 2.2 point swing. So basically, you're getting a safety at the beginning of the game, or to put it in different terms, it's you're moving from kind of a league average quarterback or maybe like a pick your second year quarterback to Kyler Murray. So Kyler Murray
is this teams coming off a bye? Is this like, what kind of rest are we talking about here?
So this is typically going to be teams that have a week extra to rest as compared to the other teams. So that means like a team played Sunday and then now they're playing again on Sunday, and then the other team didn't have to play on that first Sunday.
Okay.
And so all that to say, there was a massive difference. What they found upon the 2011 change was the PA was able to negotiate for more time off during the bye weeks. The league was willing to guarantee them 4 days off during a bye week. And so basically you end up getting pretty much a normal practice schedule. And what the league found was it was not actually a rest differential boost. What it really was a preparation boost. When you were able to prepare for a single team for 2 straight weeks, despite, your players probably resting a little bit more as it compares to the game, but not necessarily getting those true days off. That is where the plus 2.2.
So they weren't actually resting back then. They were just getting more practice time. So if you have 10 days or whatever it is to prepare for a team on the football field, that was advantageous. Now that they have mandatory days off during that bye week, we're seeing it less so.
Precisely. And I think this is kind of, especially in these collective bargaining talks, kind of a rare win-win when it comes from the highest level league and their broadcast partners. Win-win with the players, because the players get a little bit more time off where they don't actually have to go into the facility or are not expected to come into the facility. I'm sure they're doing stuff on their own or rehabbing, training, whatever. But, you get your schedule back for 4 days during the season. And then on the flip side, at the highest level, obviously any individual team is probably upset by this, that they don't get to practice a little bit more. But at the highest level, you get more competitive games where there's not a team just coming in with an immediate advantage. And obviously on the flip side of what I was talking about, the teams, then when a team is coming off of a bye week and playing you, they don't have an advantage over you. So I do think that change in the 2011 CBA was a win-win kind of for all parties involved, despite, coaches always want to practice more.
Okay. So you're not seeing a bump in teams winning in their first game coming off, more than standard rest.
Correct. There's not really any advantage as of the last 15-ish years.
Okay. Is it disadvantageous to play with short rest?
I think it's kind of it goes hand in hand. I think it's really about when you're looking at these differentials, right, and you're coming off short rest, you're automatically going to be on the flip side of someone who has that differential over you. And as a result, I just think rest, given that, you're going to get practice time coming from Sunday to, if you're looking at it like, the Sunday to Thursday quick change is probably the one that is probably in your head the most disadvantageous. But at the same time, like, it kind of comes out in the wash over the course of the season and over the course of any game. So I think rest differential is like something that frankly is getting less and less so priced in. I talked to some friends who worked on these types of models and traded these shares for sports books. They said they really priced in at maybe like 1/10 of a point at most, if it's really crazy. But I think the research, the way the sports books are approaching it, and just the general modeling of it as well, all kind of indicate that, whether you're -4 or +10, the advantage has kind of been neutralized by the limitations on practice time.
I looked up specifically. So we have a tool here at SumerSports called SumerBrain that we'll be rolling out shortly. It's a search engine that answers specifically high-level football questions. As anybody watching this show knows, the questions that you would ask that are like football related, a lot of times, especially as you get into more advanced stats and stuff, are not, it's a specific language. And so it's a specific type of search content that you're looking for. And so I asked SumerBrain about the game after Thursday Night Football specifically, and just going back a handful of years. And it looked like there wasn't a pattern that was that emerged. It looked like it was kind of all over the place. So last year, after Thursday Night Football, teams went 19-19, literally 500. In 2023, they were 20-18, so a 52% winning percentage. In 2022, it was a 47% winning percentage. In 2021, it was a 55% winning percentage, and in 2020, it was a 48% winning percentage. So it would seem like it's enough all over the place that it probably is pointing more to a story of just how regular win percentages probably fluctuate throughout the year, as opposed to this is specifically sticky, that coming off of Thursday Night Football, you would have an advantage or a disadvantage or anything built in.
Right. And moreover, this was kind of something that the league preemptively attacked in the 2020 CBA negotiations, in which the same rest guarantees that they did for normal bye weeks in 2011, they applied to what they call the mini bye, which is, you get basically a full weekend and then another week in order to prepare for your next Sunday game. They added in rest guarantees after those Thursday Night Football games. And as a result, there wasn't great significance in the bump that teams were seeing with the mini bye. Really, it was insignificant in terms of like the confidence in it, but it seemed to be about like plus, maybe half of a point, like maybe. And they went ahead and neutralized that in 2020. Obviously, we'll only have about 5 years of sample size about that right now, but that same approach has been taken over to neutralize the mini bye rest. And so this is a real thing that the players want to make sure they're taking advantage of and getting their rest days. And the league office at the highest level wants to make sure that they're delivering a premium product to all of their media partners, particularly for these primetime games like Thursday Night Football and Monday Night Football, which lead to these rest differentials and are primetime games. And typically good teams are in them specifically down the stretch. You want to have, both teams on a level playing field when you're trotting those out on ESPN and Amazon Prime.
So one of the things that I think people are looking for, we talked about, is the bye week, when the bye week is and how beneficial it is to have your bye week early versus late. Late specifically, I think, is what a lot of teams are looking for, so that you can kind of maybe get healthy for a playoff run. If it's too early, it feels like your team hasn't had a chance to get banged up. And so therefore fewer people are benefiting from the fact that you get to hit pause and get a little bit of extra time to get right. So looking into late bye weeks and how helpful this is, I had somebody suggest to me that one way that we could look at this was to go look at the Super Bowl champions from like the last 20 years and when they had their bye week. So again, Sumer Brain helped me in this finding the answers. And so I'm going to say, and you could debate this, I suppose, that I'm going to call an early bye week 1 through 9, even though the byes don't start till week 5. I get it. But like first half of season versus second half of season. So 1 through 9 or 10 through 18. And the Super Bowl champions going back to 2004, there are 6 that fell in the early bye week and 8 that fell in the late bye week. So that doesn't necessarily feel overwhelming to me enough to make me think like, oh, that late bye week sure is an advantage, obviously, in this way. So then I expanded the search to include, so that it didn't feel as arbitrary, like, just one team. Let's go to the 4 teams that make it to the championship round. So we're getting a good sample size of 4 teams that make it to the end. And now let's find out when their bye weeks are. So I'll go year by year through to 2015. And I'm going to go late bye week first is the first number. And early bye week is the second number. In 2024, it was 2-2. In 2023, it was 2-2. In 2022, it was 1-3. And so that one favored early bye weeks, meaning 3 of the teams had early bye weeks. Only one of them in 2022 had a late bye week. In 2021, it was 3-1. So now it's flipped. 2020, 3-1 again. 2019, 3-1 again. 2018, 3-1 again. Now we've got a pattern that's developed, but is it random or is it a pattern? Is there a reason that it's there? 2017 flips again. 1-3, 2016, 1-3, 2015, 0-4. In 2015, all 4 of the teams that made the championship round had bye weeks in the first half of the season, weeks 1 through 9. So What would you take away from that, if anything?
So the most well-known research on this was done prior to the 2011 CBA, and it seemed to indicate that there was not significant differences between whether you had an early or a late bye week given your winning percentage before or after. I tend to agree with that currently. There is some other things that probably need to be like dived into a little bit more about the composition of your roster, which is like, if you are a team who is picking really early and has a lot of rookies on your roster, can they make all 16, 17, 18 weeks without, a early bye week or a bye week maybe in the middle or something like that? The problem with that is, which is where I tend to lean, is that as any percentage goes over a sample, which a season is, you start to stabilize after a certain period of time. Like, we start to figure out who the good teams are and who the bad teams are. Unfortunately, we did all this work covering the draft, Lindsay, and we know that the loser's curse is out there where the bad teams are selecting young players. And if those young players are not good, they're probably going to be bad again. And so the question becomes is, if you are employing more rookies than expected or more younger players than expected, you're probably not going to be that great of a team to begin with, or you weren't a great team prior to. And so if you have a worse or better losing percentage before or after the bye week, were you actually just not that great of a team? Like, did the bye week actually have any impact or turning point on that? And I tend to believe that it's more deeply rooted in what the teams actually are than any like crazy inflection point at the bye week. So I tend to agree with what Sumer Brain said of like, it's kind of a toss up. We don't really know. We're not exactly sure if there's any great impact on whether, there's an early or a late bye week. And then if there is a late bye week, it's a benefit to a late bye week. It's probably for a team that's just already really good. And so it's really tough to analyze that, because how many teams are really, winning 13 and 14 games a year? There's like maybe 2 to 3 a year. And so we kind of run into sample size issues. We run into how good are the, selection bias issues. So I, as a data scientist, am a little hesitant to say whether it can have any significant effect. As a player, I always liked it to be smack in the middle of the season. It was a good breakup. Especially like once you start moving in division games or conference games for college teams, like you always wanted kind of like a nice general split before the quote real season starts. And so that's just like my personal opinion, but I don't necessarily think it makes that big of a difference.
I was just going to pull up the Panthers as an example here, just to see anecdotally if they kind of fit, because you were talking about bad teams drafting younger players. There's obviously something, with, whether it's true or not, there's a theme of a rookie wall. So that would seem to indicate that maybe a team that has more younger players, specifically rookies on the field, that they would benefit from a later bye. But the Panthers, I pulled it up and then closed it immediately because my Wi-Fi stopped working. They had like a mid-season bye, it looked like, last year. And because I was wondering if that was when they took off in terms of getting much better. And it might have been, and they just turned into losses. Like, they were playing better doesn't necessarily mean that everything turns into a win immediately.
Exactly.
Because Bryce Young obviously played much better. He wasn't a rookie, understandably, but he played much better down the stretch. And so it felt like that reset, felt important to them. I don't know how much of that stemmed from the bye specifically, because they rattled off like 5 straight losses after the bye.
Yeah.
But this might be one where it is true for very specific subsets, where it matters differently for different teams.
Yeah. And I think that something that I want to plug into Sumer Brain, because as a, vertically, an LLM that has a pretty innovative amount of depth, given its access to the stuff that you see on our website and some of the other data that we have here at SumerSports, rather than just be a generalized LLM like you'd use with Gemini, you could probably go in and ask on individual sides of the ball, looking at EPA, which you can find on our website, SumerSports.com, how that flows over the season. And I still am inclined to think that it's probably a lot related to the team, but I wouldn't expect that there's also individualized instances as the Panthers were last year, which like I've deep dived the Panthers last year because I was like super heavy in on them. They played terrible. And all of a sudden they seemed like they were competing with really good teams at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. And it was around the bye week kind of where Bryce Young started coming back, but they also benched him for a couple games. And so it's like, how does that relate? There's so many things. And you know, like this is why I love football, because there's so many of these rules-based elements that can make a change or you can try to take the most advantage of. But at the end of the day, it's such a variant game that you just have to maintain a strict process and the best process. And even if it doesn't turn out, 49% of the time, that 1% or the 1% that can take advantage of it and bump it 1% over from 50% after the bye to 51% after the bye will get an edge over the course of time.
Well, that's the funny thing about football too, is where there are so many variants that are included in everything. A pattern might look like it emerges, but it might not actually mean the thing that you decide that you think it means. But I feel like with regards to buys, even though it doesn't seem to have an effect on like the final team standing, which I think your point of like, you're either good or you're not, to a degree. Like if you're going to make it to the Final Four, if you're going to win the Super Bowl, then 1 week off isn't going to push you in a direction of like, oh, thank God we had that week off in week 12, or else we wouldn't have been able to win all of these games. Like you have to be that much better than everybody else to have that in play anyway. But I do think that there feels anecdotally, which is probably a word that like makes your brain break as a data scientist, something to the hitting pause and then the why you hit pause and why some people like, so in this case, you're not deciding to hit pause. The pause is built in. But I think of like basketball games and we all know that you're like, call a timeout. You're yelling at the coach to like, stop it. And I think it's not specifically a momentum shift or a momentum that you're looking to stop, although sometimes it is. It's just like, let's get out of this and then reset. I think sometimes it's specifically a coach sees like, hey, there's something that's happening here, timeout, let's address that thing so that thing doesn't continue to happen. We need this break so that we can actually give a coaching note for this thing that I'm seeing. And I wonder if there isn't something to the bye week in that regard. Like we are on a hamster wheel of a cycle every single week. We have no time to really go outside what we normally have the bandwidth to do. When we have a bye week, maybe that's a time when we can do some of these higher level, like, hey, this is a problem that I'm seeing, and we really need to put some reps into this to get this fixed. Is there any data? Stopsky, I'm going to call you in here.
Hi.
Hi. Or maybe we won't call it data. Maybe let's call it patterns. Let's just look for some information here about the weeks before and after bye weeks and whether or not there appears to be any short-term benefit from coming off a bye.
So I did throw into Sumer Brain, looking at the win percentage of the 3 games prior to a bye and 3 games after a bye. And you saw teams like Jacksonville and Denver and Atlanta that were and this is from 2019, 2024, that were at like 33% win percentage, like really struggling prior to the bye, jumping to over 50%. You saw a lot with the Texans that are 42%, over to almost 67%, Dolphins, same deal. So you are seeing that for some teams, especially for teams that are like really down the dumps, that bye week gives them a chance to reset back to 500 or a little over 500. But kind of to a point that Sam was talking about before on the other end, the better teams, because we were talking prior to the show about coaches that have like a narrative of like they are amazing, right? Post bye week, we're talking about Andy Reid, and Sam was saying that there was a course correction in 2011. So I was looking up at Andy Reid's win-loss record after a bye during that same time period with the Eagles, right? It was a 93% win percentage for Andy Reid. And that's mostly before.
Wait, off a bye? He won 93% of his games?
And that's mostly prior to 2011, right? He had 1 year in 2012 where that was with the Eagles. Now it's 73%, which is still really good. But Sam pointed out before, that's his win percentage with Kansas City anyway. Yeah. So there really is no change. So it does seem like it kind of neutered the better coaches where it's like, oh, the coaches that are already great are still great.
That's interesting.
You're just not going to get 93%. But kind of like you're saying, Lindsay, this might be something for like teams that are really struggling to then regain footing, kind of like a timeout in basketball when the opposing team goes on a run. But so I think that's kind of what we're seeing. Like for great teams, this doesn't matter. But for teams that are struggling, it does help a little bit.
To your point about the teams that improve the most after bye weeks, you do have, let's see, 2019 to 2024. We've got the Steelers, the Ravens, the Broncos, the Bills, the Falcons, the Lions, the Colts. These look like teams that increased dramatically in terms of their win percentage. That could be random, right? Like that could just be like over a handful of years, they just happened to get good opponents the week after bye, whatever. And the only reason I say that is because then you've got teams that fall into the moderate improvement bucket. You've got the teams with little to no change. And then you've got teams who actually perform worse after the bye that kind of balance this out. So in terms of teams that perform worse after the bye, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There's 11 teams in that category that are minus 8% or more in terms of their win-loss. And then in terms of the like neutral, that takes you up to 17. So now we're at half the league. So is it that these things just happen and half the team wins and half the team loses, as opposed to there being a specific pattern that's developing? Like, this feels like one you could pull up. You could even zoom out and you could go, oh, half these teams, won so many more games after a bye, and these teams lost so many more after a bye. It might just mean that some teams lose and some teams win, and not what we want it to mean.
Right. And we're looking at these teams that like dramatically improved, right? Like, the Jaguars, Denver, Texans. They're also teams that had the most leeway to gain more, right? Because they were like 33%, 41%. Like, most teams are around 500 to 60% win percentage, right? Like that's most of the league. So like if you're already at 50% and you go up a little bit, like, to 58%, like that's not a massive difference. There's not a ton you can gain from it. So it could be like, are the Jaguars that much better because they went from a 33% to a 58%, or it's just because like they were playing so bad that any marginal increase would just be seen as a big jump? So honestly, as you guys were kind of talking about it, I was thinking in my head, like, is this kind of like how we were talking about the run game like 5-6 years ago, where it's like causation versus correlation type thing, where it's like, the good teams are just good and the bad teams are just bad, and like there really isn't that much to gain off this. I'm like, yeah, maybe a little bit in terms of like, same with stuff like as a player, you want it right in the middle. As a coach, I want it either before a really big game or like, for losing streak, I need to kind of get out of that losing streak to reset. But like we're talking about minor differences really in terms of most of the league.
Well, and here's what I'll also say is we're considering this as if we were part of the franchise, right? And we're analyzing ourselves and self-scouting ourselves. But take a higher view and look at the NFL level. It could be that they just happen to have, or it broke so that they played harder teams before their bye, particularly if they had an early bye. And so it looks as if, they radically improved. Now, if you're trying to gain an edge off of that as a bettor, this is not like an edge that people don't know about. And moreover, the NFL is actively an antagonist to you trying to find an edge in that. In this paper that I've been referencing by Mike Lopez and Tom Bliss, they literally say the NFL reduces the population of potential schedules by eliminating games and series of games, so multiple games, that are perceived to be too unfair. So the NFL is literally trying to bring everything to the average and make the playing field as level as possible. And so if you are looking for some of this, okay, I'm going to like pull the trigger after the bye week because they had a harder schedule. Well, the NFL's already considered that, and they've eliminated the schedules that would be the most unfair. So that either indicates that it would be something unexpected that caused that, maybe something like Jaden Daniels all of a sudden being a top 5 quarterback last season at the beginning of the year, or injury or something that we basically couldn't predict, or just variance. But at the same time, politically, folks, like politically is a lot different than in the data, right? Like if you're sitting there and you got an early bye and you're sitting at 1-5 or 1-4 or 1-6 or 2 and whatever.
Yeah.
it starts to get a little dicey. I mean, like, think about the Bengals. They had a later bye last year, week 12, but it did tend by midseason. We were like, okay, they're probably going to take off after this bye because their schedule is going to end up being quite easier. And sure enough, that's what they did. But
that's schedule, not bye.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so
I do want
to happen that the bye was there, but it was an easier schedule that we figured out by midseason.
Everyone heard Stopsky typing there, so hold on. This is what he found with his typing.
Sorry.
The loudest typer ever.
Sorry, I'll get a different computer to type. Kind of like as I'm essentially like schedule. So when you look at the teams that are most improved, right, which is from 2019, 2024, Titans, Colts, Falcons, Dolphins, Texans, Broncos, Jaguars. 4 of those teams are in the same division, right? It's the AFC South. So I was looking up like, all right, does the NFL schedule more in-division games prior or after the bye? Yeah. And right now it's seeming like they're like, I'm still waiting to get back. So I have 2024 results, which it was, yes, more in-division games after the bye. I'm waiting for the 2019 results. If that is the case, and there are more in-division games, it would make sense that the South, which is kind of has been struggling of recent years. When they're playing out-of-division games, they're getting beaten by teams that are playing in better divisions, and when they go back to playing each other, all of a sudden the win percentages go back up. And so it very much could just be again kind of what Sam has been kind of pounding the table for the past hour and a half since we've been talking about this. It's just how good of a
30 minutes.
Well, I mean, like
nobody knows that we talked for an hour before we started.
That's true.
I
don't speak to you guys ever. I don't even like you guys. We just come on at the time and we hit go, and we don't know about anything we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's the more we're discussing this, it does kind of feel like it's just has very little impact.
Well, and even going back to what I was saying about the late bye weeks and the championship teams, there's even an extra one thing I didn't even mention. There's an extra bye week in the late window. Like, so if I say not late window, but like the late half, if you have the second half of the season bye week, there's actually one more week worth of buys in that sample. Because if we're going 1 through 9 and then 10 through 18, the buys are actually weeks 5 through 15. So in the first group, the first half of the season, then you've got weeks 5 through 9 as an option. And then in the second half of the season, you've got weeks 6 through 15. That's week 10 through 15. So that's an extra week in there. That's 6 weeks as opposed to 5 weeks. So the fact that we're still not coming up with an obvious, like it is pointing to the second half bye is helpful to getting teams to the finish line makes me think that it's very much not a thing that should matter because there should be more teams in that sample.
Yeah. Here's what I'll say though, is that we can say that it won't have, when we say it doesn't have an impact, what we really mean is there's not a discernible edge. It could have an impact. CeeDee Lamb could get hurt and come back at the bye week.
Yes.
There's all these things that could potentially happen. Or you could just have a Sean McVay or a 1% coach that can just take advantage of the slight extra day or two, and you could build out an edge that way. But that is not a discernible edge that teams can look at, plan around, and attack unless you have either immense talent or immense variance. That's what we mean when we're saying that it doesn't matter.
Well, it means that it's the, like, if the rest advantage needs an asterisk to it, then it's not really the rest, right? It's the rest with A or B or C.
Exactly.
So really the advantage that you have there is A, B, or C.
Precisely.
And then that person or that thing with rest is even better. But it's not just, let's tell a story about rest disparity.
Right. Okay. 100%. And this is a great segue into the international games, I think, because the A, B, or C is like a lot more A, B, or C this year. And so, Lindsay, the ones that stuck out to me that have already been announced are September 28th, pretty early on in the season. Stopsky, chime back in, boss.
What week?
I'm back. Oh, I get different things.
Are you talking about the Vikings now?
The Vikings are weeks 4 and 5.
Okay, 4 and 5.
Okay, yep.
By the way, can I sidebar for 2 seconds?
Yeah.
Never, 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 never put out a NFL schedule that doesn't have the week number attached to it. Like, I mean, I get for schedule release, most people are actually taking this information in so that they can plan their travels. But like, how hard is it to just write week 4 next to it? Like there are whole platforms that if I go look up schedule and results of a season, I'm like, oh, October 3rd they won. Oh, did they win on October 3rd? Like, was it week 3 or week 5 or what is it? Like, give me a week number. Like, how hard is that? Please continue.
I love it. This is a great rant to go on, I gotta say, because like these weeks do matter, because the Vikings, who were one of the best teams last year, have going into the season a roster that is retooled, but for the most part, people feel is very strong and have some of the best players in the league on their team. You look at Justin Jefferson, you look at their 2 tackles, you look at some of those defensive players that they have. People think this is a really, really good team, are basically doing probably what will end up being 3 weeks in, Western Europe, let's call it Ireland and London. I'm not going to go so far as to call it the UK, because my Irish friends would get very upset at me. But nonetheless, the teams that they are facing are not in the same bucket as them. The teams that they are facing is the Steelers and the Browns, who have the biggest question marks at the quarterback position of any teams in the National Football League. Mm-hmm. The assumption is that those 3 teams, who will all be starting, let's call them will have first-year quarterbacks in the mix somehow, even though they may not be starting. Seems like J.J. McCarthy is going to start. All 3 of those teams will have buys around this time. And so to your point, Lindsay, the rest will be the rest, and the travel, moreover, will be the travel. But the A, B, C, D is so variant for these teams, particularly the Steelers and the Browns, that it's like this could be a turning point for them, but it ain't going to be the turning point because it's the bye or because it's the rest. It's going to be because one of these teams is going to go into midseason, basically, or the early part of the midseason, either having answered questions or having massive questions, particularly stretching back to their offseason plan.
So backing up for 2 seconds here, just so that we clarify what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Teams that play internationally have their bye week the week after. That's the one thing that we know. Even though the bye week isn't actually scheduled or announced yet, teams that go to Europe have a bye the next week. So we know that the Vikings, who play in Dublin in week 4 and London in week 5, are going to have a bye week in week 6. Like, we know that they're an early bye. We know that the Steelers, barring some change to the whole system, they do things differently this year. The Steelers, who play in Dublin in week 4, are going to have a bye in week 5 to give them time to come back. The Browns are going to have a bye in week 6 after they come back from their week 5 London game. So fascinating to just look at those 3 teams and the early buys, because I think it's fair to probably zoom out and say, maybe we handle our quarterback situation differently than we would if the bye was in week 13. Maybe if I'm the Browns, and I think they're probably, my guess is that this ends up with Joe Flacco. If I was to just pick one right now, I'd probably go Joe Flacco starts the season. So if that's the case, they could go Joe Flacco starts the season. Even if a rookie makes it close, then they can kind of take like almost like a Drake May with the Patriots approach. Like, let's start somebody else. Let's give the rookie a minute to get up to speed. And then we have an early bye week where we can plug that guy in if we so choose. Or if it works with Joe Flacco and we don't have to, then great. But like, that's probably a smarter approach, as opposed to like, if it was a week 10 or a week 11 or 12, then maybe they just go like, F it, like just go take the season and get all of the experience that you can get. If we're going to pivot to you, if we've decided in our own meetings that we're likely to pivot to you at some point, the week of the bye probably changes their approach.
And that kind of talk about what you're just saying here with the Colts, right? Because they're playing in Berlin on week 10. We've talked a lot about the adding Daniel Jones, and I think we all can kind of agree, like, they add Daniel Jones, but they really want Richardson to win that job because like they have all that invested into him. If it was a week 6, week 5 bye, you would probably just give the job. Like, I'll say if it's close, you just give it to Richardson and be like, all right, well, if this goes south, we'll switch to Daniel Jones afterwards. Week 10, you have to go into week 1 and be like, this is a guy that we think is going to start for 17 games. And it can't be like, oh, well, we'll see what happens. And if Richardson gets outplayed by Daniel Jones in the offseason, in the preseason, there's a real chance that I think he could start week 1 because of a late bye.
I think I disagree with that. I think they have to play it out with Richardson. Now, it does create a scenario where if he falls on his face and they have to pivot, they might just be set up where they have to pivot in a week where it's a short week, and oh well. But also, I kind of think in that particular circumstance, they're screwed anyway if they have to pivot. Like, I mean, it's just like they need Anthony Richardson to hit. Like,
and to tie in two elements that we've also talked about, these are teams that, assuming the AFC South is still the AFC South, the Jaguars will be playing in London, as they always do. The Texans have questions, but obviously they were a pretty good team last year. And so the AFC South, both of these teams will be in this situation probably later on in the season. The Jaguars play Sunday, October 19th, so mid-October, week 7. And then the Browns and the Steelers are obviously in the AFC North, where you're having to play against two of the top 5 quarterbacks in the league. And so it becomes like an entire different equation. The Steelers are probably going to have one of the best defenses in the league. That's the expectation, or that's the standard at least. And so there are all these questions about how the implications that this will have for the division, the implications that it will have for the team. And then moreover, the last piece is particularly looking at Kevin Stefanski and Mike Tomlin. These teams have really good coaches, and there is kind of like a flip side of the coin takeaway that you could get from all this rest talk that we're talking about, particularly of how it was actually, there was a pretty significant effect prior to 2011 in rest differential. And that's that coaches know how to prepare. If you give coaches extra days to prepare, they will prepare well. The league has since neutralized that, but if you are slotting in another quarterback, you're giving a new quarterback 100% reps. Those maybe one extra day, but definitely the idea going into the season that we're going to reevaluate and self-scout and make a decision at this point will allow a coach to not have to swing into it and prepare differently. So I think that's another thing to look at. That's an interesting takeaway, even though it may not necessarily, there may need to be more research done. The indication is that it was a preparation advantage, that coaches know how to prepare, and that now that these teams will be traveling, will be coming back, but will have some extra days to figure it out, they may be planning to figure it out there and may be able to mold their rookie quarterback into the season a little bit more.
Where'd you go, Stopsky? Stopsky's out. Stopsky didn't want to weigh in on that.
I'm currently looking at other games that have been released so far as you were talking. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I just called you out on it, put you on the spot, and that's how we roll here.
I'm the producer, not the analyst. I'm punting this over to you, Mrs. Rhodes.
Okay. I do think that there's a lot to unpack that feels like it's very specific to the situation, which 100%. I think is the biggest takeaway, is that some of these things that we talk about as being meaningful around schedule release might in fact be meaningful in specific instances, but as a whole might not be meaningful. Like once you look at like, it might not, the same things might not be meaningful for everyone.
Right. Well, I think what I'll say here is there are specific instances. The thing you just have to realize if you're in a team is to make sure that you're not planning for said effect to go into effect. So like I'm talking about a very specific situation, the quarterbacks. But if you are a team who is who looks at their travel and is like, oh, we can be 2-3 or 3-5 or whatever before our bye week, and you just expect that you're going to get a win the next week just because you're on a bye week, that is not the correct expectation. You should not expect to have any advantage because the league and the Players Association has tried to eliminate that for different reasons, but for reasons that are their own and thus have gone into effect.
Somebody on Twitter responded to this conversation with a note about the Ravens, suggesting they said, if I recall, the Ravens, it's Aiden, have requested a late bye week and have been having them week 10 plus. They were offered a bye week after the week 6 London game versus the Titans in 2023, which they declined. I can't speak to them having any say about where their bye week is, but I did really quickly look that up on SumerBrain, and it looks like their bye weeks are not consistently late at all. In fact, last year it was week 7. The year before that, it was week 13, week 10 before that. And then we've got a week 8, like a lot of week 8s in here. So I don't know that they have established a pattern of having late bye weeks, and maybe they shouldn't request the late bye weeks based on the conversation that we've had. Although let's look at just that a specific team, since what we've talked about is maybe specific teams do benefit from them. If you were looking at a team like the Ravens, do you think that the Ravens would specifically benefit from late or early, or do you think it would matter?
So I think if you're the first thing that I want to address is the political implications, because I think that's what you have to worry about a little bit more of. Like, there probably is an actual increase in media if you were to research it, if you are not good during bye week, and there's hoopla going around. So if I'm a team that's good, I want to get probably as many weeks in as I can. Let's put injuries to the side for now to show that I am good, or to get a idea of that I'm good. The Ravens are actually an excellent example of this, because they did have kind of like a middle late bye week last year. They come out, they lose a really weird game, the Kansas City Chiefs, toenail away. All of a sudden they're like looking like they're not going to be able to crawl out of it. But it turns out they just need to get their defense in line. All of a sudden their defense goes from a bottom tier passing game defense to one of the best in the league. And sure enough, the Ravens are good. Real shocker. They have a lot of talent. Then they go into the bye week and get right, whatever. And so I don't think the bye week made a big difference there. The only item that I would note is that while we are identifying rest as not making a difference in your game-to-game winning percentage down the line, what it may make a difference on is the playoffs, for example. And so the idea that you can like break the back half of the stretch run up to kind of get into the playoffs.
Ooh, that's it. Yeah.
I don't think it probably would have any discernible effect, but I could imagine how in very limited situations, when you have key guys that could be injured, like giving yourself a week and then giving them a short period for you to either ramp other guys down, ramp them back in, could be of interest. But I think there's no way that there's a discernible effect on that. And I think it would be a very, very specific instance that is really only applicable to teams like the Ravens, who are really, really good.
But even then, we have a rest versus rust debate that always comes up for like teams that have buys. And I don't know that there's any evidence that one versus the other is appreciably better. Mm-hmm. So that kind of takes us right back to square one, right?
Yep.
It might just be the specifics of your team, which is how the coaches are deciding in a lot of these cases, whether to rest their guys or to play through and try and maintain some sort of momentum, is because like, hey, if my team is really shot to hell, like we've got a MASH unit over here, we're going to take that minute to rest up because in this specific instance, we need that. So,
yeah. And I think there are just logistics that, like the logistics of injury rehabilitation and frankly, just the logistics of like game operations that probably are greatly impacted by this, even though it may not necessarily have an impact on the WRL column.
I really wish that we'd landed on something that was like, hey, look for this one thing when the schedule is announced for your team. And instead we're like, nothing really matters.
I do want to add one thing, and this is more for the fan side, because Adam just put out a tweet about this. You now have to look at what platforms have exclusive rights to certain games, which is a very new NFL thing, right? Where a game is exclusive to Prime, exclusive to YouTube, whatever it is. I had a question for you, Lindsay, a media question for you. So the week 1 game in Brazil is an exclusive to YouTube and YouTube TV, but it will be streamed for free in its entirety on YouTube. So a free NFL game on YouTube.
Okay.
What is your take on that?
On it being free, or just the fact that we're all going to go to YouTube to watch football and the pattern that is being established there?
The fact that the NFL is giving anything away for free is interesting. And then the fact that it's exclusive to YouTube.
Yeah. Wait, you made a face there, Sam. I'm wondering what your face was.
Yeah, I mean, this has been
Chargers too. It's a pretty big.
This has been an obsession of mine for a while. In that, especially given the news. Dude, sports business, SumerSports show. Let's go. Especially given ESPN's getting ready to release their quote flagship app, which is like actually going to be named ESPN. Real shocker there. But the implication that these people, I'm talking specifically about ESPN and Google/YouTube, have been moving toward, or Disney, I guess I should say at the highest level, is that they want more UGC and they want to own the rights to these places and allow UGC. And I think,
excuse me, UGC means
user generated content.
Okay.
And so I think what's interesting about this, I did not know this, Stopsky, until right now. So this is my fresh thoughts, is that YouTube is trying to move into people just using YouTube as their cable provider.
Yeah.
And
which,
I think they already own Sunday Ticket.
Yeah.
The question that I'm asking about ESPN in particular, because ESPN owns the NBA's rights, ESPN owns basically all of college football. And obviously they have Monday Night Football as well. And now they have playoff games, is like, what happens when they allow content creators to utilize their footage for UGC purposes on their own platforms? And I think that's a real question for the networks, because YouTube has more viewers per day than the networks. The networks are just free. Well, YouTube is also free.
Yeah.
And the real barrier has been and not knowing how to monetize the National Football League on top of, their ad platform, their over-the-top platform, whatever, for free. But if YouTube has figured out a monetizable way, which I think this is a test of, to have free games on YouTube, it changes the entire media landscape as we know it, in my opinion.
To me, it feels like, so it's not free for YouTube. They're paying, like the NFL is not giving it away for free. YouTube is giving it away for free, just the same as CBS gives it away for free and NBC gives it away for free. So they're just trying to establish themselves as a media arm similar to those,
right,
so that those go away.
Right.
But like in their traditional form, right? Like, so everything is over
100%.
streaming, and YouTube is a channel in the same way that all of those other ones have traditionally been.
Right, because my mental thought about it being free is not, again, not that the NFL's not making money. The NFL's making money, right? Is that I know the NFL is very big on the perception of their league, right? So like when I go back all the way to like the video game sales, right? Back in 2005 when there was still an ESPN 2K5 and a Madden, and 2K released the game for, I think it was like $30, like undercutting Madden by like $20, and the NFL pulled the license from them. Not because the game wasn't good, but like they didn't want to be seen as a devalued league. So the fact that they're letting it be for free, I think it's just interesting, and kind of what Sam was saying, like this could be a test to if there's an entirely new media landscape. But
I also think the NFL wants it to be for free. I think where they get their prestige is YouTube paid X number of dollars for the right to broadcast this game. And then the NFL is also invested at the same time in maximizing their audience at all times. And so they can continue to grow the game and have a rabid audience. And the more that it's behind paywalls regularly, I think that actually is counterintuitive to that goal. I think people will probably pay, but maybe a slightly fewer pay if it's harder to find. And so they want as many people watching and becoming degenerates as possible, right? Like in the sense of like not degenerates in the sense that you're like betting on games necessarily, but like rabid, I will do anything. I will buy anything that you give me. And I think that they kind of own the marketplace in that sense right now. And so YouTube giving it for free, if they can find a way to monetize it, is actually best case scenario for the NFL.
Yeah. And more,
their problem is they go to these streaming sites is that now people get mad that they have to buy a subscription to Peacock or get a free one and then remember to cancel it. And then they don't remember to cancel it. And then they're all mad, like that maybe cuts into the numbers. And I think obviously it does cut into the numbers. The streaming numbers are lower. The NFL doesn't want that. So this is a perfect scenario where if YouTube can figure out a way to monetize it, and they're the ones best suited to do that.
Yeah. And moreover, I don't know what is going into this deal. I'm like frankly shocked. Like this is a real game changer. I think if this goes well, is like in the P&L, the profit and loss. If YouTube can pay the same amount as the networks do, this is actually plus for the NFL, because you're getting all the data back from your YouTube users that like my bunny ears that I have back there aren't transferring my age and, you know, what I tried to cook and what recipes I was looking up on YouTube the other day. You know what I'm saying? And so like Velveeta, maybe if I wanted to make some mac and cheese, like maybe I can put more targeted connected ads. And obviously
you're right.
ESPN and all that, ESPN and, you know, Peacock, whatever, have those capabilities as well. But no one has the network effects that YouTube has. And no one has the international bounds that YouTube has.
You guys think it's annoying to all watch the Kelsey commercials at the same time through every NFL game? Now everyone's targeted at you.
Oh God. 2026 SumerSports target ads on NFL content.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the question of this always was how can it possibly be profitable for YouTube? And if YouTube, or excuse me, for the leagues, because the question is once you give in to this free model that YouTube has, YouTube can basically chip away on your ad revenue because now they own the ads and they can target the ads, and thus the ads are way, way cheaper for them to serve. And moreover, they can do way more than like just your
no, the broadcast partners own the ads too.
I know, but they are the broadcast partner now. That's my point. Like with Sunday,
I'm just saying all the NFL is profiting here is a check at the beginning for the rights to broadcast it.
I know. My point is it's almost like a kind of a paradox in that because YouTube can target, it can decrease cost at such a level. At some point, they're going to be like, well, we're the only player in town. You can only reach X amount of people with this amount of stuff with us. And that's what big tech, that's the grand issue with big tech right now, is that like, at what point does it become Netflix, YouTube, Disney, and which I guess it kind of always has been, but you can't really play them off of each other in big tech where they own the distribution, the ad software, and the market. Like they own the people that are watching, as compared to a network, which is very old tech, and you don't own the people's data that you have. You don't own the targeted ads, and you don't own all this other element of the structure. So you're basically giving away ownership of a lot of stuff that didn't even exist, but is very valuable to the distributor. And that's what causes a little shuffle, because at what point it's not going to happen in the NFL. Where it's going to happen, and where I thought it was going to happen in 2023 was the NBA. The NBA ended up cashing out as well. So you'll start seeing it at these lower leagues of them being like, well, just put it for free on here, and we'll pay you to be on here, but we're going to pay you per click, and we're going to pay you per advertisement, and we're going to pay you like per our goal, not per your goal anymore. And I think that's the real balance that needs to be hit between the NFL, well, less so the NFL, but the median league and the distributors.
So Awful Announcing just released an article like 30 seconds ago about what's happening here. And there's a belief that in 2029, the league's going to opt out of their current deals. And the NFL's already said one of the main things they're looking for is whoever they decide to go with, the ability to achieve reach. So this very much seems like a test of, can YouTube achieve reach? And if so, we might be seeing a massive change in 2029.
This is fascinating. I'm glad you chipped in on this stuff, Steve.
You're welcome. That's what I'm here for.
That is really interesting. And then of course, whoever they sell NFL media to also
$5
down that road.
Maybe it's YouTube.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right. I think everybody thinks it's going to be ESPN because that's sort of been in the talk like for so long. But what does that change for ESPN? I don't know. Like, what is it? If it is them versus if somebody like YouTube was in the mix for that. Like, honestly, YouTube makes more sense to me because of the library, NFL Films, which is kind of one of the things that you're talking about Like what is an NFL media arm actually selling that somebody doesn't have, right? It's the rights to certain tentpole events that other people don't have. So for like draft, that consolidates draft if it's ESPN into only them. And now all eyeballs go through ESPN as opposed to being split between ESPN and NFL Network. You get the combine, right?
Yep.
You get a handful of like Saturday and international games that the NFL has retained for NFL Network. So you're selling like essentially broadcast rights to those games that they held on to. They gave up Thursday Night Football a while ago. There really aren't that many other things outside of like, shows, but like people who have shows already, like that stuff all goes away and doesn't matter. It just gets swallowed up.
Yeah.
So like, what are you buying?
To your point, Lindsay, of like access to these tentpole events, it's going to be interesting to see how the way that sports got big in the world generally, but in America in particular, is because they became the biggest media organizations out there. They became the only media organizations that could command millions and millions of people to watch at the same time. And, Universal and Sony and all the picture studios, like they could get a lot of people to watch, but they couldn't get them to watch at the same time. And that's the ad value of NCIS or whatever went down. That's not the NFL. And so the question becomes, if they are going to go this route of reach first, particularly international reach, particularly for the NFL, and getting handshakes with big tech, is how are they going to feel not being a media operation and realistically just being a content creator? Because that's what you're becoming. And that's what Lindsay just outlined. You're becoming someone who is just having a big event. You're not becoming someone who is producing this massive operation in which you have a big team of people covering it at the highest level and so forth and so on. You're really just becoming either an event holder or a content creator. Now, they still have the best events and they still have the best content. But when those margins start getting chipped away on the media platform side, because big tech knows exactly to a T what value you're bringing in a way that the broadcast networks had to estimate because they didn't have the data to do so. Mm-hmm. That starts becoming a question. Now, it could be in grand excess, and WWE is a great example of this, where no one really knows how their numbers are doing right now, but it seems as if they're growing. Their YouTube channel is magnificent, the best in class, best in the industry by far, not even close. They have content
social numbers go through the roof.
Outrageous. Yeah. They have content going back to 1972. But they were a very data forward organization, which is ironic. But when you think about wrestling, and they've been in the business for a long time. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this all moves forward. This is one of my favorite things to talk about if no one can figure it out.
Yeah. No, very, very interesting. All right. So we're going to wrap things up here, but as the schedule is released tomorrow, I'm curious as people maybe listen to this after we're done having this conversation, hit us up on Twitter. I'm curious about what kinds of points or things we didn't take into consideration, because I'm legitimately curious whether we should be taking these things into consideration. Happy to put some other queries through SumerBrain and see what kind of content we can come up with. It's nice to have somebody do the research for you and know that, especially in a case like that, we're like, what week was the bye week? That's easy. All right, fine. I don't have to look for that for several hours. We're making cool products here at SumerSports. It's fun to be able to put that into practice. For Matt Stopsky, who stuck around for the end of the show, and Sam Bruchhaus, I'm Lindsay Rhodes. Thanks for being with us.